Hey guys, Everseen here. Are you tired of the inflation in PoE 2? Starting to hate trade because you just can't seem to make any money? Well, I've got the ultimate money-making strategy here today because I'm going to teach you how to be self-sufficient with the solo self-found game mode. For anyone who hasn't played SSF, basically it is solo self-found, which means that you can only find and use items you've found yourself, and you can only use your stash across all of your characters. This makes this game mode a bit harder than trade because you actually have to overcome challenges that you face for builds and have to have that in mind when you're actually making good builds. I'll focus on a lot of progression techniques to help you get more self-sufficient and have a couple good builds that cost next to nothing with easy progression so that you can actually try out SSF and get overall better as a player. Today's video, I want to talk about how to progress in SSF, or really in general, with a fresh start with no currency at all. I'm going to go over the campaign, gearing process, and early map progression. Okay, so let's start it with the campaign. If you have a great build, the campaign feels like a breeze. If you don't, it feels like a slog. There are plenty of content creators out there with terrific builds, and as long as they don't get nerfed, you can look to use these for your SSF journey or an economy reset. First thing I want to touch on is to gear appropriately for which fight you are about to experience. A good example would be Act 1 because there are a variety of damage types happening. Your first wake-up match is going to be against Draven and Ascendancy, because they both do fire damage. By checking vendors on every level up for fire resistance gear, you'll find tons of pieces to help in those fights. Once you have near 50% fire resistance, those fights feel completely trivial. Then there's Count Jonor, which does a lot of cold damage. The same process applies. Don't be afraid to stack cold resistance and switch gear to get cold resistance to do this fight. During your playthrough, I would pick up any socketed piece of gear or any superior gear because we can break these down with the salvage bench to get both artificer shards and quality currency. If you're in Act 1, you don't actually unlock the salvage bench until you find Renly's workshop in the Ogam village, so find a stash tab and just throw everything you find in there for now to break down later. Another trick you can do is once you progress so far into the campaign, like Act 3 or so, if you have lots of gold, make sure to check Act 1 and 2's vendors for any gear that has sockets or quality for cheap. All vendors change on every single level up, and this can help you in a pinch and doesn't cost that much gold. It does take a bit of time to go back to the other towns though. Let's also talk about gambling. The way gambling works is that the vendor has a maximum of 100 stacks for gambling. Each stack will cost one unique boss death to get. Now, for example, if I'm on a level 90 character and try to farm Act 1 bosses, you won't receive any gambling stacks. The reason why is because you need to be somewhat within the level of the zone you're farming to get credit for your unique boss kills. Another thing in campaign is to just refarm zones. Don't be afraid to farm the Clearfell boss, for instance, because she is so close to the next zone, you can farm her repeatedly easy. Another one would be any zone that has guaranteed rare spawns, like the 2 rare monsters in Dishar. Once you outlevel content by around 5 levels, the drops start to diminish. It's up to you how you'd like to farm them. The holy grail of campaign farming, in my opinion, is Trial of the Sekhemas. A nice thing you can do is the initial quest version infinitely. Basically, when you complete the first floor boss of the trials, you have the option to take your Ascendancy points, but you don't have to. Simply log out and in, and then proceed back to the trials to see that your quest coin is there again. As long as you don't take your Ascendancy points, you could farm this infinitely. Really good to farm rare monsters as well as the boss. You can also get tons of relics to help you in your runs later. Honor resistance relics are going to greatly help you do your further runs. A thing to note though is that you can only claim the chests at the end once in the quest version. So really you're only getting gear for killing monsters and bosses. Prioritize hourglass rooms and chalice rooms to see the most guaranteed rare monsters. And yes, the same thing can be achieved in the Trials of Chaos. At any point you can log out and go again as long as you haven't taken Ascendancy points. I would much rather do Trials of the Sekhemas though, because there's a lot more rare monsters that are guaranteed. Another thing worth noting about the Trials of Chaos is for your second set of Ascendancy points, I prefer to do the Chimera because he is the least lethal of the 3 possible unique boss options. At any point you can simply log out and in and restart that quest version, and I frequently do this to try and get a decent run with easy modifiers as well as the Chimera boss. Alright, so let's talk a bit about the gearing process. In Path of Exile 2 currently, it's like spinning the damn slot machine and praying you get something good. The way you have to approach gearing in this game is by brute forcing opportunities. The more opportunities you have for gear, the more chances you have at getting something decent. Personally, I'm constantly picking up any base that works for my character. A nice thing about hybrid dexterity and intelligence class like the monk is that we have more gear options to work with while progressing. We can go for either evasion energy shield hybrid, or energy shield gear. That's another reason why I think monk is extremely strong for progression and in a fresh start scenario. I personally pick up anything white or blue that can work for my character and spam transmute, augment orbs at them until I find something half decent to regal. I'm also constantly checking every item from a vendor for that juicy 1 mod, 100 life piece of blue gear that I can craft further. Another big important rule for gearing is prioritize your weapon over everything. In my opinion, it's much better to have way more damage than you need in the campaign because it makes the gearing process a lot easier. If you're killing more things, as Elon would say, you're getting more things. Definitely a good weapon is all you need and the rest will actually fall into place. Getting your build's damage online quickly will net you way more opportunities to get gear. One way to brute force opportunities is by gambling from Alva. Use your gold to try and get gear to craft with if you are lacking on a particular piece. Also, don't be afraid to use Gwenin, Rog, or Tuyen, because although Expedition is kind of lackluster right now, you are still forcing more opportunities for gear through it. Another way is to pick up white bases and or magic bases to either transmute and augment or regal gear to hopefully end up with a decent 3 mod rare to then further exalt. Another that I've already mentioned is the Trial of Sekhemas, where you can almost target farm certain types of equipment through caches at the end of a floor. You can get helmet and boot caches, for example, so this can help you target farm gear. Make sure to check vendors too if you're really struggling. Sometimes they can have that 1 mod you're looking for on an item. I've actually found a +2 projectile skills quiver from a vendor before. Lastly, another good way is to use essences. In PoE 2, essences are pretty bad, but they can help you target a specific mod on an item. It is just another way of brute forcing opportunities. A common thing that I've tried to do personally is using the Essence of Ice on rings to try to get either cold damage or all elemental resistances or cold resistance, or an Essence of Enhancement for a defense modifier. On a ring, the only defense modifier that can roll is flat evasion, and this is really nice to try and start with on a ring, especially if you want to take advantage of the Ingenuity belt. This will give you tons of flat evasion. One really strong thing I've found for SSF is by using Ascendancy skills or default skills. The thing that all of these skills have in common is that their links and level are actually dependent on the level of your character. This is extremely strong in an SSF environment so that your progression doesn't get gated behind a greater or perfect jeweler orb. I recently started a Shattering Concoction Pathfinder in hardcore solo self-found, and I want to touch on some key components as to why I chose this as a fresh start. First thing is obviously that my main skill is level dependent for the links. Shattering Concoction will get an additional link at level 40, 65, and 90, making this a really good starting build to farm with. Another crazy interaction with this build is that I'm using a Widow Hail to scale massive amounts of percentage bonuses from my quiver. For every 50% increased bonuses on a +2 projectile skills quiver, we will get +1 to gem level. The concoction skills are very interesting because they have tons of flat damage, and as you can see, Shattering Concoction at high levels gets an insane amount of flat damage. So our main skill also levels up based on our character's level, which means we don't have to hunt for a level 20 gem because that is going to happen naturally too. No matter how good at the game you are, if you are in a fresh start scenario, it's very unlikely that you will be under-leveled. More often than not, we're going to be over-leveled. Because of this, our concoction skill will actually increase in level, giving us more damage. Basically meaning our skill is going to reliably be +1 to any skill gem that you can currently find. Getting a ton of flat damage from the skill makes it incredibly easy to scale because you can focus into percentage increased damage instead of anything flat. We already have so much flat damage, we really just need percentages. Also, how I'm getting Widow Hail is by gambling through Finn on a level 2 character for bows. Widow Hail at that item level is the only bow that can spawn from Finn as unique, so it's generally easy to get. Getting a good rolled one, on the other hand, takes some luck. Another strong fresh start right now is the Invoker Ice Strike Monk. Freeze is an extremely good mechanic right now, and most of the campaign is trivial on the Monk. By utilizing gems that don't scale mana modifiers like Martial Tempo and Cold Infusion, we are getting insane amounts of cold damage and attack speed, which will in turn net us more freeze uptime on a boss. For a fresh start, Monk is probably my #1 choice right now because it is so versatile and really not that complicated. And Protect Me from Harm is also really strong because we can scale our physical damage reduction based on our evasion rating. This means that we will get a bit of cushion for hits because of the physical damage reduction for when we don't evade an attack. Another thing that's nice about And Protect Me from Harm is that you actually don't have any armor, so armor break doesn't really apply to you and you still get all the physical damage reduction. The Monk is quick and snappy, and Ice Strike also teleports to enemies if they are in the correct strike range. Overall, this is my #1 choice for an easy fresh start, and if you're interested, I have a complete leveling guide for this build that I played myself in SSF to level 96. Alright, let's talk about Waystone progression. Now, since there is a 1 death rule to PoE 2 for Waystones, I'm basically going to treat this as a hardcore discussion because ultimately you don't want to die in your maps. First thing is stop doing maps that are too difficult. I've done up to tier 4, 5 Waystones as just normal rarity because the difficulty and availability to do these is way more plentiful. Once you get to this range, it becomes harder to sustain, so you want to try and transmute and augment your Waystones. Skip modifiers like elemental weakness if you have less than 90% total resistances. This curse will lower your resistances by 15, so if you have 90 total, you will still be at the cap. Don't do elemental penetration maps. Increased stun buildup, crit chance, damage, extra chaos damage, and poison on hit are terrible unless you have decent chaos resistance. Now, of course, you're going to have extra maps that have terrible modifiers that you can't run. Simply set them aside and use them in the Reforge bench to get higher tiers of Waystones. Another thing, when using the Reforge bench, if you include one normal rarity Waystone with a couple magic or rare Waystones, the Reforged Waystone will come out one tier higher and normal rarity. You can use this trick to recycle your terrible maps and get a new map to craft on. Early on for your Atlas tree, I would totally focus as much quantity of Waystone drop chance and as well for them to be one tier higher. This will make it way easier for your Waystone sustain. A note I like to take early on as well is local knowledge, because if we are doing desert biome maps, we have more chances for trials to spawn. These trials can be used to get maps if you run out and also lots of gear. For example, if we drop a level 70 Barrier for the trial of Sekhemas with 3 floors, each floor past the first is a +1 to zone level. This means that it will technically be level 72 on floor 3. If you're in a pinch for maps and also higher tier maps than you're currently running, you can do trials to try and get some. I would also go for twin threats because it is simply one more guaranteed rare monster in every map, and that can net you more Waystones. Another thing for sustaining Waystones is try to fight bosses in maps as much as you can because they're basically a guaranteed Waystone. Use the Overseer tablets as well to get bosses on your maps and run them. Alternatively, some league mechanics that add rare monsters are going to be your best bet for Waystones. Breach, Expedition, and even Delirium can add rare monsters to your maps, making it easier to get Waystones. The best one of all is obviously Breach because of the sheer quantity of monsters and rare monsters in them. Alright guys, and that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully you guys got a little bit of value out of this video. If you guys have any questions or concerns about how to do SSF or anything, if I may have missed some things in the video, definitely catch me over on Twitch, or you can leave a comment on the video below and I'll respond to you guys. Also, if I did help at all, maybe consider subscribing or leaving a like on the video. That would really help out my channel. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.